So, hello again, everyone. Thank you for attending today's virtual roundtable for the National Neurotrauma Society, brought to you by the Training, Education, and Mentoring Committee, or TEAMS, for National Neurotrauma Society. So, the title for today's virtual roundtable discussion is From Curiosity to Career Career Opportunities in Neurotrauma. And today's session is expected to last for about 1 hour. And I am Nurul Sulimai, a research associate at the University of South Florida. And it is my pleasure to be one of your co-chairs for today's event. And before we start this session, there are some housekeeping notes that I would like to share with all participants. First is regarding the questions to the panels. So Nishell and I, as co-chairs, we will take turns to ask the speakers a series of preset questions, but we do encourage attendees to ask any questions that is related to our topic. So you have two options to ask your questions to the panels. The first option is by using the hand raise reaction feature at the bottom of the Zoom page. You will find like a hand emoji where you can select for the hand raise reaction. We will then unmute you and then you can ask directly to the panel your question. And option two is to type in your questions in the chat box. So type in your question in the chat box where Nishell and I will actively monitor for your questions in the chat box and we will ask the speakers on your behalf with time permitting. I would like to remind all participants that today's roundtable session is being recorded and the recording will be available on demand for the National Neurotrauma Society members. And without further ado, I will hand it over to Nishell to introduce our speakers for today. Thank you.
Okay. So the objective for the next hour is to give insight into existing options or alternative career path in neurotrauma, and this is ranging from academic, industry to non-traditional path. And I have the pleasure of introducing our speakers for the next 60 minutes, but first let me introduce myself. My name is Nishell Savory. I am a Ph.D. candidate at Drexel University College of Medicine under the supervision of Dr. Ramesh Raghupathy. Let's get to our speakers. So first we have Amanda Buick, who is assistant professor at the University of Kentucky. Dr. David Brody, who's a professor at the Uniformed Services University of the Health Sciences. Dr. Amy Chang, who's an assistant professor at the University of Kentucky. And, Dr. Ann Rossler. Give me 1 second, I'm having some technical difficulties. Ann Rossler, who's a medical science liaison at Tolmar. Let's get into our questions. So, our first question, can you guys briefly describe your current position and how long you've been in that role? So, Dave, I'll start out with you.
Oh, okay. I thought we were going to go ladies first. No, I'm happy to.
No particular order here.
No particular order. Okay, great. So yeah, I've been in my position for 8 years here at Uniformed Services University. And I'm a professor of neurology. When I came, I was the director of the Center for Neuroscience and Regenerative Medicine, which is a traumatic brain injury research organization. It's been renamed the Military Traumatic Brain Injury Initiative, and I'm now the Chief Scientific Officer and Chief Innovation Officer for that position. I'm also a physician at the Walter Reed National Military Medical Center. I take care of patients with traumatic brain injuries and other neurological conditions, some cognitive performance optimization activities, and some anomalous health incidents at the National Intrepid Center of Excellence here on the Walter Reed campus. All of this is in Bethesda, Maryland, right outside of Washington, D.C. So all of this is all part of the United States Department of Defense. And disclaimer, I am representing just myself, not the Department of Defense.
Thank you. Annie, I'll call on you.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me today. So I am a medical science liaison at Tolmar. Medical science liaisons are essentially accountable for all scientific aspects of clinical development, and they're really the face of the company to our external thought leaders and stakeholders. So essentially what I do as an MSL is I build relationships with some of the smartest doctors in the field, and I collect insights from them about our products, which I bring back, and that enables the growth of Tolmar's portfolio But ultimately, our goal is to get the right drug and the right dose to the right patient. I've only been in the medical science liaison role for about a month, but I've been working in industry, kind of moving around from early stage development and other scientific positions, and also portfolio management, including a stint abroad. Currently, I am based in Chicago and focus on the Midwest region. My area of expertise is prostate cancer, but my undergraduate degree is in neuroscience, and I've also focused on a few neuroscience projects throughout my career. So thank you so much. I'm excited to be on the panel and glad to be invited. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Amanda?
Hi, everyone. I'm Amanda Glick. I am an assistant professor at the University of Kentucky, although I did just hear a couple weeks ago that I got promoted to associate. So thank you. I'm also your team director for at least a few more weeks, and then I'll be handing the role off to Stephanie Robel, who's also fantastic. So I've been here at the university for about 9 years. Math is hard. And I started off in a different college. So first I was in College of Health Sciences, and then I transitioned over to College of Medicine. And now I'm in the Department of Neurology. And for the most part, what my research has focused on has been identifying novel neurorehabilitation aids for individuals with cognitive impairment. In some instances, that includes our TBI and ABI participants and patients. And in other instances, it can also include aging, as well as some COVID encephalopathy. So primarily my research focuses on using commercially available products. Right now, my main interest is in virtual, augmented, and mixed realities, and to identify what kind of cognitive benefits we can have from using these devices, which also I'll do a shameless plug that I have a session Monday afternoon at the conference if anybody else is interested to hear more about kind of the rehab side that is going on at NNS.
Thank you. Amy, you're last, not least.
Yeah, no worries. Save the best for last, right?
Yeah.
So I want to thank Amanda, Nishell, and Nurul for having me, and all the attendees for being here. Hopefully my advice will be helpful to you. It sounds like, based on the experience of the other speakers, I am the baby of the group. So I am an assistant professor at the Spinal Cord and Brain Injury Research Center. I started my lab in January of 2020. Hello?
You're
Yes.
good, Amy.
Okay, yeah. So I started my lab in 2020. So that's a story on its own. And my lab studies astrocyte biology in CNS injury and repair. I am actually co-chairing a session at NNS this year, so this is perfectly timed. Come see me.
So before
That-
we move on to the second
Mhm.
questions, we have any questions from the trainees?
Yes. For the trainees, please, you are welcome to use your webcam so we can see you. But if you have a question, please feel free to hand raise your reaction on the Zoom, and we can unmute you and you can go ahead and ask. If no questions right now, we will proceed with the second questions that we have for the speaker. So question 2 is, what is something that you wish you had known while in grad school? Let's start off with, we'll go in the middle. Annie, would you like to?
Sure, I can go ahead and get started. So one of the things that I wish I would have known and internalized is that failure in graduate school is really just part of the process. And failure doesn't mean that you don't belong. Really, I think a PhD can feel like a series of setbacks, and that can be really discouraging. But I think if you look at each setback as a learning opportunity, then being able to recognize that as a very normal but painful experience and part of the growth process. So that would be what I wish I would have really truly taken to heart when I was a PhD student.
Anybody else want to chime in? Other speakers?
No, I would say that's excellent advice. I mean, so much of what we do as scientists, for the most part, especially in academia, is hearing no. whether that is from, unfortunately, the funding agencies or, manuscript reviewers. Like the point of getting a PhD in a lot of instances is to be able to, stand up and be able to handle the criticism and know that just because somebody might disagree with you doesn't mean that you're wrong necessarily, right? It just means you have a difference of opinion. And I look at it as every opportunity. My joke is I don't like to use the F word, or at least not that particular F word. So I look at it as a learning opportunity. I'm also coming from more of a learning theory background, so that's maybe why I think of the pivot like that. And each opportunity is you get to learn how not to do something, because how often in our careers does everything go perfect? It never does. If it did, then what would be the point? A lot of us would be bored, right? That's the whole reason, is that we love to problem solve and figure things out. So, excellent advice, Annie. I absolutely love it.
Thank you.
Dr. Amy, Dr. Brody,
Yeah, I second that. That's what I thought of too, is really value that experience. I know when you're in it, it may feel like you're stuck, but it's part of the process. And, failures are part of the learning curve, and really learn to balance confidence with humility. Going back to what Amanda was saying.
And I would agree. And I would also wish I had understood better that science is a team sport. That when I was in graduate school back when dinosaurs roamed the earth, we had the idea that you really sort of had to do everything yourself as a PhD student. We published a lot of two-author papers where it was just the graduate student and the principal investigator. And that's just not the way science works in the modern era. It's a team sport. And so learning how to work with other people, that your social intelligence is just as important as your intellectual intelligence, that your ability to network and communicate and collaborate and share tasks is just as important as any academic or technical brilliance that you may have.
That's true. I think that's very true. I can relate to that. I as I come towards transitioning from research associate to assistant professor, I think one thing that I need to work more on is to delegate, because we are very good at doing things, and then we are very good at pushing our limits, and we always say yes and yes, we can do this. But it's also important to delegate, I think, as to broaden up our schedule. Is there any questions from the participants? If you are wanting to know more about something related to these questions or not, we can move on to the next one.
I would also
Can I add something? Oh, sorry.
Yes.
Go for it, Amy.
Yeah, I would say have the mindset of not I have to do something, but have the mindset of I get to do something. When you're a trainee, you really don't realize all the stuff that PIs don't want to do, but have to deal with. But as trainees, you get 100% devoted time for research, just to think about the problem, to read about it, to use your own two hands to solve the problem. And I think trainees should realize that.
Thank you.
My kind of advice that I wish younger Amanda, maybe I should just say less experienced Amanda, would have known, was that it's okay not to have everything figured out. It's okay to kind of learn from the experience and be able to pivot and say, okay, it's all right. Like, I like to joke that I have all these existential crises that, during grad school, it felt like it was occurring on a weekly basis in some instances. And one of the things is that, when I went to school initially, and Annie's going to laugh at me, I thought I wanted to go back and teach at my alma mater. And then I ended up going down a very different research path. And it was something that, I also like to joke that because I have a gaming lag, I get to play all day, which is a way, like, really what I feel a lot of times about my research is I get to have a lot of fun doing it. And I get the privilege of continuing to do a lot of research. And in my mind, and what I try to instill to my trainees, is that research is fun. Research is something that's so cool that we get to do all the time. And, to build off of what Amy says, PIs, it's slightly less fun than you'd think. There's a lot more stuff that you learn kind of on the job that isn't addressed yet in grad school. And, a lot of times, if you're fortunate, you have some really great mentors along the way that can help you to develop these skills. But, just don't be afraid to not know where it is that you want to go. Of course, don't get me wrong, if you're like in your 4th or 5th year of your PhD and you don't have a clue yet, then it's a little bit more stressful. But for early trainees, it's okay to not know yet. And even for I've changed what I was doing when I did my postdoc. My postdoc was specifically at a DoD facility, Dave, doing blast overpressure research in rodents. And now I'm doing clinical research. So you always pivot.
I have a follow-up question to this. Actually, do you remember if when you were in grad school, have you started like networking, or is that something that you would wish you would have done? But are there any?
Oh, yeah, this was actually going to be my answer to your next question. Networking is the most powerful tool that you have in your toolbox. And I think a lot of times we think of networking as like this very stiff activity that just has to be done. But it's more than like formally collecting names for like some Rolodex in your mind. It's going to conferences and finding mentors and people who will teach you things and help you learn and open doors for you. And it's also just about being a consistently kind and friendly person who people want to work with. So like for me, all of my promotions and opportunities in industry have come from networking. So I'll give you an example. When I accepted this MSL position, it was essentially my dream job. I'd wanted it since I had graduated from my PhD. And I wrote it into my goals for the year to have some coffee chats with MSLs. I had my first coffee chat and we got along really well. She was a hiring manager for a position that opened, sent me straight to the interview. I had the interview on a Friday and the offer in my inbox on Monday. That never would have happened if I wouldn't have just had an initial conversation to meet this person and, learn about her field. So, yeah, I would really emphasize networking and try and think about it as building relationships and not necessarily collecting names and numbers.
No, that's excellent, Annie. I mean, that's one of the things that I try to do every time that we go to neurotrauma. And one of the things that neurotrauma as a society is so great. And it can seem really intimidating as a graduate student. Because I can't tell you how many times my students or a medical student has said, well, I'm just a medical student, just an undergrad. And I'm like, that's not just anything. You are, and that's awesome. And most of the time, PIs don't necessarily know if they're talking to a graduate student, a postdoc. I mean, in some instances, you can kind of tell, but, especially if you've got the little initials at the end of your name. But neurotrauma is such an open and welcoming group. I mean, that was one of the main things when I joined team back in 2019, 2020 during the pandemic. I was just so kind of it was just so remarkable how opening this whole group and this whole community was. The other thing is that as you guys are moving forward and thinking about like, do I want to go into academia or industry, these types of opportunities where you get to co-chair a round table, team, not only just team, but neurotrauma wants to promote trainees. This is something that we're very passionate about. They're so passionate, they created the team group, right? And so this is something that you guys are interested. This is for our audience members, as well as our panel, if it's of interest, is please reach out, join team. It's an easy onboarding. And everybody is really quite welcoming. They want to help you network. They want to help you make these kind of lifelong connections.
Yeah,
I have a sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
I have a follow-up question because I know I go to these conferences and I meet these people, But I think it's hard for me to keep in contact with them, especially like if they don't respond to your email. So what advice do you guys have for us?
So there's that, for me at least, and I'll let everybody else chime in as well, but there's that fine line between being, persistent and being kind of like a pest, right? And I know
yeah.
being the pest. And unfortunately, like as I've gotten busier, which unfortunately is also correlated with, title changes, if you will, we get so many emails a day. And that's if Outlook hasn't been naughty and stuck something in your spam or junk folder, right? But just send an email, remind the individual how you met, where you met. And normally, if you drop the neurotrauma, and heck, flag it as something like "great meeting you at NNS," because sometimes you guys have all heard the "too long didn't read." I mean, I'm guilty of that. Everybody is probably guilty of that. So just flag it, and in my experience, most people will respond if they've got the time.
Okay.
Yeah, I think we can go ahead with the third question, Nishell.
Oh,
We should let you go.
I see you start to talk.
Yeah.
Do you have any questions from the trainees before we move on? Since we're on the topic about networking or anything, before we move to the third question, I'll give you like 30 seconds before I start reading the question. Going once. Going twice. All right, moving on. So third question is, what advice would you guys give to the trainees who wish to follow the similar path that you guys are in? Amanda?
Sure. So for me, a lot of it is also networking. So I'm research title series, which might be a little bit different, and it can be a kind of frustrating role to be in because it's a soft money position, and it's not necessarily something that I'd recommend for the long term because it's rather high stress. But one of the things that I did, and I was very lucky to do, was my background is basic science. I mentioned I did learning theory. I actually did frustration theory, which I'd be happy to talk offline about. It's a frustrating topic. Yeah. Get to do all like the dad jokes today. I love it. But it wasn't necessarily like my fourth year of grad school. I had no idea what I was going to do. That was one of the many existential crises. And I was at Society for Neuroscience, and I was probably tired from walking around, and I wandered into a symposium, and it was actually on neurotrauma. And I got thinking, which in a lot of cases is always really dangerous, but also really great. And I was like, oh, this is really interesting. I wonder if anybody has answered this question. And so, like with many things in science, it started with the question. And then it became this is something that I actually think I'd really like to pursue. What do I need to do it? Knowing that I was in learning theory, I needed to move into a different field. So I knew I was going to have to do a postdoc. That was fine. It was in, 2014, 2015, where they were having a shortage of academic positions. So a postdoc was already on the agenda. And then, I networked, and that's how I found out about the DoD contractor position to be a postdoc. There are a lot of really great, especially for neurotrauma, DoD has a lot of really great opportunities, and I'm sure Dave can talk about this more extensively than I can. But there's a lot of other contracting agencies. I actually was a postdoc with the Henry M. Jackson Foundation, and I was based in Silver Spring, Maryland. So that's how I got started. And then from there, I heard about a job posting, and was like, hey, that sounds interesting. I was actually well on my way to getting commissioned for the Navy, and I just had to pass the physical. I went on the call for Kentucky because, my dream job was moving back to Kentucky because my family's here. And I went, and I was like, this is a really nice opportunity, but, I was also in a really comfortable place because I was fine with my decision to join the military. A lot of really good opportunities with that as well. And then I just kind of followed the science, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how I ended up in neurology, which is a very happy place for me. But you know what? It's also okay if academia isn't your area, because there's a lot of really great opportunities in industry. And I'm not going to lie, I've thought about making the transition numerous times. And industry doesn't just have to be, you know, a medical liaison like what Annie's doing. It also has a lot of grant management, which are really great. There's policy. So it's really kind of, and this is going to sound hokey, but follow where your passion is, you know, and that really can help you to at least decide where you want to go in the future.
Thank you. Amy? We'll move on and come back to her. I think she's connecting. Dave, what about you?
Yeah, that's a great question. Two things. One is to read a lot. You know, read. When coming back to the point about networking, if you meet somebody and you want to network with them and you're coming at it from a position where you've read their papers and you know the literature, and you say, I read your paper in, 2003, and you showed this, this, and this. What's happened since then in this field, and how does that relate to this thing that was discovered in 2011? You come across really sharp. Okay, this person knows their stuff. That's networking, positive networking, not just from a position. I mean, you don't have to know everything. Of course, you can't know everything, but if you come across like you're serious, then that comes across well from a networking perspective. So that's one thing, read a lot. Second is work on something that matters. There are lots of questions that could be answered, but not every question should be answered or should be answered with the highest probability. So the difference between people who are successful oftentimes is not necessarily in their intellectual abilities or their technical skills or even in their networking abilities, but their abilities to ask the right questions, the questions that actually matter. From an academic perspective, the most important thing is to be funded. And the funding agencies are interested in funding answers to questions that matter. So if you're a clinician, it's an advantage because you know what matters. You've seen your patients. Your patients tell you what matters. If you're not a clinician, that's fine. Go shadow some clinicians. Go see what it's like. Go ask them some questions about what matters and what doesn't. We're not working in an abstract field. We're working in a very practical, medically relevant field. Traumatic brain injury affects humans all the time. So go work on something that really matters.
Thank you. I know, Annie, you said we kind of jumped a little bit. Do you have any other advice for us?
Sure, I could. As everyone's given such good advice so far, I kind of wanted to build on something that Amanda said about pursuing your passion. Someone very smart told me one time to think about your passion as your North Star. And I think it's very unlikely in your career that you'll get your perfect job followed by the next perfect job. I think you need to really identify what you're curious about and where your strengths are and what opportunities are good enough fits for you. And that might satisfy different parameters, beyond the job. So Amanda mentioned like being in the right location or being a fit for, your personal life or your family. So I've really kind of like thought about the North Star concept as I'm trying to figure out my next steps in industry. I still feel like I'm a scientist at my core, even though I've kind of spent some time in project management and now I'm on the medical affairs team. So in the past, when I was presented other opportunities and things like regulatory affairs or quality, I knew it wasn't going to make me happy long term and it wasn't aligned with my long-term goals. I knew that I enjoyed communicating and, talking about the science and still being a technical expert while building these relationships and leveraging my interpersonal skill sets. So yeah, I would pass along the North Star idea to everyone in the audience. And yeah, some really good advice here.
Thank you so much. I think Amy is having some audio problems.
I'm back. For now, great. I'm back. Sorry about that.
It's okay. It's okay. Technology. I'll have you give your answer for the question. I can read it again. Amy?
Yes, I'm here. This question
Okay.
that I'm seeing, what advice would I give to trainees
Yes.
who wish to follow my path?
Yes.
Well,
Or
this is an interesting time to think about this question. I think it's very pertinent. Well, I just want to say that I personally think that the world needs more PhDs. And just because there are so many complex problems, in terms of biology and any kind of problems that needs problem solvers. And I feel like we don't have enough PhDs to think about this. I hope we will be able to support the career path development of PhDs. But even if you feel like this is not your path, I think the soft skills that you accumulate during this training are very valuable. And we've been teaching you, or I try to teach my trainees this. We teach you how to think, we teach you how to write, how to work as a team. So I think even if after you receive a rigorous PhD training that you don't end up as a PhD, I think you are well equipped with an arsenal of skills to go out and succeed. May you choose to be a lawyer or in finance or in venture capitalism or being a freelance writer. I hope that the soft skills will equip the trainees to do all of these things.
Thank you guys for your answers. Any other questions from the trainees before we move on? Okay. Move to the next question.
So the next question that we have is, what are the main differences in career growth between academia and industry? So maybe we'll start with academia first. Amanda?
Well, my little plug is there are very few jobs in which you can hope to receive 2 to 3 promotions in your lifetime. Certainly not 7 years plus apart. And it's gonna sound like I'm hating on academia. I'm not fully, but I think everybody, should really go into this with their eyes open. When I initially was so I got a degree in psychology, both undergrad and my graduate. I've got experimental psych for a master's and PhD. And when I told my and Annie's gonna laugh again because she knows what I'm talking about. When I told my mentor that I wanted to go to grad school, he was like, "Why?" And it was, "Well, I have questions that I want answered." And it's like, okay, that's a good reason. So yeah, I think that because academia also isn't just the professorship, right? There's a lot of other stuff that we do as part of it. Like you can go on to become a director. You can go on to, continue to be an advocate, a dean. I'll be honest, I have no desire to go the deanship route. Director, I could see myself being interested in doing, especially for a research center, because I like helping and I like promoting other scientists and helping others to network. I'm going to toot my own horn, but I'm good at networking. And that's something that I think is really hard for a lot of scientists. A lot of us can be kind of awkward turtles, and that's okay. What I tell students is I'm like, play to your strengths. If you are an introvert, you don't have to be an extrovert. You do have to talk to people. That is a given. But there's no reason that, you have to go and be the life of the party. You can. I always try to give opportunities, and that's one of the reasons why we have the chat engaged as well for everybody who might not be comfortable being on center stage. Ironically, I'm not somebody that particularly enjoys the front and center, but I tend to be one of the louder people in the room, and so people think that I do enjoy being more front and center. But I tend to be a little bit more shy when you first get to know me. That's something that's gotten easier as I've gotten older. Yay. But at the same time, you be yourself. You guys are wonderful as you are. You guys are brilliant minds. You've already made it to this point. and just, it's okay to discover that whatever career path you are currently in is not for you. I think I actually told this to Annie when she asked me about grad school, and I was like, if you don't like the program, and this is going to probably make PIs cringe, I said, get out. There are other opportunities. You don't have to be in a PhD program to be successful. There's a lot of different things that you can do. I think that a lot of times in the PhD program, we do our master's students a disservice by saying it's a consolation prize. It's not. You don't need to necessarily have a PhD. If you want to ask and answer your own questions, then yes, a PhD is helpful in that respect. It gives you a lot more opportunities. But in the sense of academia, growth can be somewhat limited comparatively, in my opinion. And I think, that's where it's really nice to have somebody like Annie on the call who has had such a wonderful breadth of experience within industry. And, she's being quite modest with what she has recounted. I got to follow her through her journey doing her stint internationally. And I believe you had a blog at one point as well. I believe I read the blog too.
Oh
So
gosh.
Maybe Dr. Annie can contribute to the differences in the industry part. Like, do you think, do you agree, like without PhD, you can also be successful in the industry? Do you think so?
Yeah, I think so. Amanda's already given such good advice. So I knew that I wanted to go into industry very early in my PhD journey. One of the things that really drew me to going into a large pharmaceutical company was in my PhD I was kind of going down a deep rabbit hole and working on some very focused projects, and it was so difficult for me to see how they would ever help anyone one day. And that's not every PhD project, but for me I just really struggled with how far my project was from being translatable. And that's something that I found in industry is the projects that you work on do have pretty immediate results. And if they aren't valuable, then the company will not pursue them. So I find that to be pretty satisfying. I guess that could also be a drawback if you are someone who prefers to work in a more theoretical realm. Um, the other thing about industry is that career growth and promotions and reviews are pretty clear, and the metrics are very transparent. And ideally, your goals should be aligned with every level of the company, so you know exactly what you need to hit and what you're getting evaluated on, which just is a good match for me as a person and how I prefer working or how I prefer working. Um, so the advancement does tend to be pretty fast paced. I will say that the downside of industry is that, despite some higher incentives and rewards and compensation, it is pretty volatile. So especially when you're working in a larger pharmaceutical company, before Tolmar, I was with Pfizer, the largest pharmaceutical company, and we would go through reorganizations every year and a half to 2 years. So I was constantly updating my resume, thinking on my toes, and trying to figure out what my next steps would be. I was working at Pfizer's site here in Chicago on the project management team, and Pfizer closed the site here in Chicago. Suddenly, I was at risk of being made redundant. So that was sort of why I accepted the transfer abroad to England. Unfortunately, after I went over to England, that site was also closed by Pfizer, and we had no idea. So I stayed for about 8 months or so and then came back to the US. But all this to say, it's kind of a high risk, high reward environment. So you have to be um, okay with that and a little risk tolerant because you sort of need to build a safety net for yourself and think about what you're going to do next if, a big shakeup does occur. Um, yeah.
Maybe Dr. Amy can contribute before we move on to clinician scientist view of Dr. Brody.
Amy, I think you're muted.
I'm sorry, can you say that again? Would you like me to answer this question here?
Yes, please, before we
Oh,
move on
okay.
to
So I
Birdie.
honestly don't have any experience with the industry. All I can offer is career growth in academia. But what I can say is, echoing Annie's comment on the volatility of the position in industry, it is true. I do have friends in industry, and he actually changes jobs every 3 years. But he actually enjoys it. He said that is about the amount of time that he could stand any position, and that's the amount of time that he needs to move on to learn something new. So I think my comment here is that, be informed and be honest about what makes you happy and what makes you grow.
Thank you.
Dr. Birdie?
Yeah. So I guess my perspective is the exact opposite of that, which is that in the clinician scientist, it's a very, very, very long process. So most of us do an MD and a PhD, and then a residency in a clinical specialty, and then a postdoctoral fellowship or a audio or some other sort of a post-residency specialty clinical training. And my wife said I was a MD, PhD, OLD, and she thought I'd get my first job just shortly before I retired. So I got my first job at age 37, having been continuously in training, no gaps, nothing, continuously in training through age 37. So it is a very, very long process. But not to sound immodest, but the clinician scientists are on the top of the food chain. We're the ones who are defining what matters and leading the teams and organizing the projects and setting the direction for the field as a whole. So it's a heavy responsibility. I feel very like a heavy weight of responsibility every day. But if you like that, nothing has more autonomy than being in the leadership role.
Yeah, I've heard somewhere that the MD PhD is like the Navy SEAL of the scientist.
Well,
But I
fewer of
think
us die. Fewer of us in the long run. The
you go
survival is
first.
better.
No.
The survival is better for us than for Navy SEALs.
So, is there anyone else who wants to contribute to your opinions before we open up? Yes.
Well, I would say that actually academia is pretty unstable too, right? Especially at this time, at these times. So, for example, the project lifetime depends on the grant, that the funding you're able to secure to sponsor that project. So you are constantly having to reinvent yourself as well. There may be some backup if you're at a teaching institution like University of Kentucky. When you don't have enough funding, you may be able to get, fill in your efforts with teaching. But if you're at a medical school or, an institution without an undergraduate or a big teaching responsibility, you are having to constantly apply for funding and get and continue your research. And the turnaround time is also between 2 to 5 years, right? That's the average time of a pilot grant or an NIH R01.
So, is there any questions from the participants? Please feel free to raise your hand. Use the hand raise function before we move on to the next question. Nishell,
You're
would you
letting
like
us off
to?
easy.
Some people are
Yeah, we have about 13 more minutes.
Yeah.
So you want to go ahead?
Yeah, I can. So our last question, well, second to last question, kind of like touching this a little, but do you guys have any advice on how early career scientists can decide on what career might be right for them? Dave?
I invite early career scientists to spend some time with me. I do this all the time. I had a lot of opportunities when I was a young person. I can never possibly pay the back to the people that gave me opportunities, so that I can only pay it forward to the next generation. So I invite young scientists to spend a day with me in the lab, spend a day with me in the clinic, come to let's walk around together at posters at the National Neurotrauma Society meeting, and let's just you'll see how I ask questions and how I hone in on what the get out the stiletto and get right to the critical flaw of the research that's being presented, to review a paper with me, things like that. So I think there's no better way than just to walk a few miles in the shoes.
I can pick up from there. I would say self-evaluation is very important. Honesty with yourself is very important. What makes you happy? What makes you comfortable? What are your capabilities? Have an honest talk with yourself, then decide what is right. And be informed. Talk to people, like Dave said, right? But first and foremost, be honest with yourself.
And just to riff on that, I'm sorry, just to finish, I didn't actually think I wanted to practice medicine. I was surprised. I surprised myself that I actually like medicine as much as I did, and that it turned out to be okay for me. When I was a young scientist, I did not think I was suited to be a clinician. So, be prepared to be surprised about yourself.
Anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think my advice is to see if you can start exploring your options as soon as possible. And I know this is very difficult in graduate school. The suggestion to tag along with someone who's in that role is a great idea. I had to get a little creative when I was a PhD student to gain some traction in these fields that I was interested in. I wrote a personal blog, but that led to me writing a column for the American Heart Association. I volunteered for Executive Women in Bio on their marketing team, volunteered in the emergency department. My PI was not very happy that I was using the time that I could have been spending in the lab, kind of pursuing some of these things that were like tangentially related. But it really helped me kind of identify my strengths as a communicator. And, all of these things that I was pursuing, extracurriculars, volunteering, shadowing, writing in my spare time, like ultimately helped me understand where I wanted to go and what I wanted to do. And I think when I was applying for positions for my first industry role, some of those things really kind of helped me shine as a candidate and might have contributed to the hiring team pulling my resume because I had already kind of had this idea of things that I was interested in. So it takes time, it takes some creativity, but I'd say start as early as possible and say yes to as many things that as you have the bandwidth for.
Thank you. Amanda?
All really great advice. I don't know if I really have anything else to add to that except to just pivot and just say again, go with where you're interested. Get as much experience as you can. And if something piques your interest, dig a little bit deeper, do your research, if you like teaching, teach. Nothing says that you have to be a researcher. There are a lot of really good teaching institutions. Annie and I are products of them. We're going to do a shameless plug for liberal arts here. Oh, we got a center mug. Woo! If you love research, do research. Just really go with where your passion is, because at the end of the day, you're the one that's living this life. You're the one that is responsible for these decisions. And it is one of the things I learned from my parents, for whatever it's worth, is it's really hard to go to work and be miserable. And there are tough days. There's always going to be tough days. There's going to be tough people to work with. But ultimately, if you enjoy what you do, it helps a heck of a lot, I will say.
Thank you. Any questions from our audience? Okay, we can move on.
All right, so we have like 8 minutes left, but this is the bonus question. If Any one of the panels would like to contribute? How do you maintain a work-life balance in your position, or is it a myth?
Now, this is a great question, guys. And for it's I think that the biggest one of the biggest takeaways I had from COVID was I listened to a talk about it's not work-life balance, but it's work-life boundaries. So when, if that's
Wow.
how you want to be when you're home, you're home. When you're at work, you're work. Of course, sometimes things cross over.
Yeah.
I really have tried to set hard deadlines. I had to do this in grad school because I was working all the time and burnt out. Um, and I have, with the exception of when there's a grant due or a letter of recommendation that needs to go in. Um, when I'm home, I'm not working. Of course, that was tough during COVID because I was always home. But, when I'm off the clock, I try to be off the clock. And again, I'm a hypocrite and I say that, but then I don't actually live it a lot of times. And I see that Dave is smiling. Um, but, it's really about finding what your boundaries are and what you're comfortable with and just trying to maintain that as best you can.
I would add, marry the right person.
Hmm. Wow.
There are some people who are suited to be married to scientists and some people who are not. I think it's really important to be honest with your partner or your life partner. If part of your work-life boundary balance, whatever it is includes having a family, be really honest about what it is that they're getting into, because your partner may have no idea what it is they're getting into and may be very surprised, and unpleasantly so. So just being really honest and upfront about what it is. Fortunately, my wife has a PhD and is a academic faculty member and understands, what the rigors of academic life are like. But I've seen a lot of people struggle when their partners just didn't get it. So, it's okay. Don't sugarcoat it. It's a hard life. We scientists, we love what we do. We have a huge advantage over most folks because we love going to work. And so people who go to work just to earn money, they may not be able to understand it because it may be hard for them to imagine that you actually like doing what you do. They're like, what do you mean you're not coming home at 5:01 and just can't wait for your thing to start that you're still thinking about, despite what Amanda says, you never completely turn off. You're always thinking about science in the back of your mind. So you're never completely separated. But yeah, make sure everybody knows what they're getting into.
Yeah, I echo what Dave said and Amanda said. Balance is not really balance. It's not 50-50. Okay. It's really like an integration. What are you doing at the time? And the second thing I want to mention is that it's not just scientists that don't seem to have a work-life balance. The truth is, if you're working in the space of creative arts or any leadership position, you are probably going to work beyond the hours of 8 to 5. Okay, so the third thing I want to say is you have to be okay with the decisions that you make. So for example, if you're spending the next day working on your grant, you have to be okay with not spending that time with your family. If you decided to spend that time with your family, you have to be okay with losing that day of writing your grant. So just be at peace with your decisions.
How about Dr. Annie?
Yeah, so I might be different because I love having Teams on my phone and Outlook on my phone, and I take it everywhere. But that really kind of allows me to work as much and wherever I need to. So for example, we have a huge conference coming up this weekend, ASCO. So I'll probably be working 12 to 14-hour days, Saturday and Sunday. I also run a lot, so that means I'm going to miss my Saturday morning run group, which I'm really kind of sad about. But the point is, I spent this morning, kind of taking it slow, getting packed. I spent yesterday afternoon at the grocery store getting snacks for the conference, and these are things that are happening, an hour out of the workday, but I know that I'll be working more later this week and needed to take the time for myself. So my schedule looks crazy and is all over the place. And then the week after that, I'm, gone Monday through Friday, and that's pretty typical. The MSL is a 50% travel position, but that means that I'll probably take a Wednesday off and use that time to do laundry and go grocery shopping. And because I have Teams on my app, if anyone needs me, they can just shoot me a message and it'll take 30 seconds and then I can forget about it. So I think I'm probably working like all the time, but also like not 100%, if that makes sense. I'm very good at multitasking and that works for me. So yeah.
Yeah, I second that running suggestion. I think running gets me through my PhD. With I needed that endorphins to get
Yeah.
through. That's my drug in PhD. So I think we have 2 minutes left. If anyone else would like to, oh yes, I see from Cody Hubbard. I'm going to
Hey.
unmute you now. Miss Yahweh, can you please unmute?
So
Yes.
thank you so much, everyone. My question is kind of for the whole panel. So earlier you all talked about like kind of the key of like following your interest and also like asking the right question. But I'm curious, like within the success that you found within science, has there been like a theoretical or analytical approach that has like really been the keystone to how that's like been kind of driving your science?
So
If Dr.
I,
David or Amanda, would you like to go?
I'll say not as much theoretical for me in the sense that I am interested in helping people. And in some things in medical science, we know that it works. We might not understand the pure mechanistic quality of it, but it's kind of like I think of it also a little bit like the placebo effect. I don't care if the sugar pill makes me happy. It makes me happy, right? And so long as it doesn't hurt me, I'm also really good with that too. So in that respect, for like my research at this particular point in time, I don't really do a lot of mechanistic. Um, Ironically, video games help you cognitively, which is not what lay media says. But I'll take it, because it's beneficial, and I've seen benefit in the patients that I've worked with. But Dave, do you have a different approach?
Cody, that's a really interesting question. So my approach has been to take just what's right at the edge of what we know in humans that we know a little bit more in animals and try to advance that edge in humans, not reaching too far, but just reaching a little bit of a step from animals to humans. So probably the two most successful stories that I've had in my scientific career were taking a microdialysis method for measuring amyloid beta dynamics over time, which was established in animal models, and then applying it to humans for the first time and being able to measure the amyloid beta dynamics. Very interesting from the perspective of why does traumatic brain injury contribute to the increased risk of Alzheimer's disease. And so in some ways, it was just a bridge. All we did was take a technique that was relatively well established in animals and use them in humans for the first time. And that was published in Science in 2009. And then similarly, the notion that you can't really visualize axonal injury very well in living humans, but we have great methods for visualizing in animals. And so we used histopathology co-registered with an MRI method called diffusion tensor imaging, which is potentially translatable to humans. And so we validated it first in animals, and those were the McDonald et al. Papers from the 80s, and then used it in humans, specifically service members who'd just been injured from the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. And so it was an example of like a question that really mattered. I mean, these are our soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines who'd been injured in the wars. And we were going to visualize the invisible injuries for the first time. And that one was published in the New England Journal of Medicine. And so you take that edge and apply it to a question that really matters. I would say is the kind of the theoretical approach. Now, lots and lots of that's 2 success stories of about 15 others that didn't work out that way. So the point of that failing over and over and over again is right. You will fail over and over and over again as well. even for questions that are just as good a question and just as good a theoretical foundation.
Thank you, Dr. Brody. I think it's 3 minutes beyond 1 hour. I think it's good to wrap it
Yeah.
up at this point, Nishell.
Yeah, so first and foremost, I'd like to thank our four panelists for taking time out and joining us and sharing their experiences and giving us some insightful advice and career options in neurotrauma. If you guys have any burning questions, feel free to email them to office@neurotrauma.org. It's on the screen. Again, that's office@neurotrauma.org. And you heard at the beginning, a few of our panelists will be at Neurotrauma next month. So feel free to connect with them and network. Yeah, and thank you guys for joining us. And I'll turn it over to Amanda so she can give the final closing remarks.
I actually have to peel off, so bye everybody. Thanks.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Yeah, about the only thing that I really have to really highlight is the fact that Nurul and Nishell really drew this roundtable together on their own, and so they deserve an absolute huge round of applause. It'll be virtual, but we're all clapping for sure. And ladies, thank you so much for really spearheading this endeavor. We could not have done it without you. And I know I enjoyed it quite a bit, getting to talk to everybody and getting to see everybody's faces. And again, I'll extend another big thank you to our panelists. Thank you for volunteering your time for us. And also big thank you to ICS for Hannah and Yahweh. I think Yahweh had to step away, but you guys are always amazing, and we couldn't do it without you, literally, because most of us don't have that level of technical skills.
That is so true.
Appreciate it. And thank you also to our audience. Please feel free to reach out to us. If you email office@neurotrauma.org, like everybody said, you will be able to get in touch with us. Just say, I have more questions for, and then drop a name in there. And I look forward to seeing everybody at Neurotrauma. If you haven't already, sign up for the team networking event. And thank you guys, and we'll see you in Philly.